I had a little foul interference at a Quantico hit me with the video I made. Wanted to let you guys know exactly how Charlie Kirk was killed. I had a third phone call about that video, and I basically told him to shove it where the sun doesn't shine. Okay, little background. I was a high power shooter champion. My father was one of the champions of the world in the 1960s. Two of his friends were Carlos Whitefeather Hathcock and John White, or AKA John Solderwhite. He was one of my mentors. I was more of a wing shooter. You see, I went out of state a couple times, and I always say that about people when I showed up places. Who the hell is this guy? Because they were used to shooting against the same people and taking home the same stakes, and me, it was like throwing a skunk in the room. You know what I mean? Because I'd be 10x, 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 and then all of a sudden I'd be in the contention, and I won a few and I lost a few. Okay, I'm not going to say I was goddamn good in my day, and I always preach that firearms are not fucking toys. They're not to intimidate people. They're not a penis extension. They're not a part of your manhood. And they can get firearms can get your house raided. It can get you a jail sentence. It can get you falsely charged, especially in corrupt states like where I live, because they don't go by the facts. They just go by what they make up, called an affidavit of probable cause, and then they come trounce your ass. So you people out there that are carrying guns around, yeah, it's scary times that we live in. Just watch what the hell you do. All right, now, I gave you the background that we had a gun club, and I personally sat with Carlos Whitefeather Hathcock. Now, look, I'm only a 13, 14-year-old kid. But one thing I could tell you about both John White, a.k.a. Solderwhite, and Carlos would sit there, and his nickname was actually Seaman. I don't know how they did that. I guess because he was a Marine and seaman, and his first name started with a C. I really don't know. But when Carlos sat with us, it was, hey, Seaman. And then John was just John, okay? And then my dad would sit there. My dad was a gunny on Paris Island. I don't know if I told you. And he was kind of a discredited destroyer skipper. He picked up refugees, even though my dad, we grew up calling him Little Hitler, Little Satan. He was kind of a little Hitler. For him to do an act of compassion, I don't know if he was compelled by other members of the crew, but he kind of lost his commission on the boat, and then he was back at Paris before. By that time, my mom was pregnant with me, and he went reserves, and that was it for him. All right, how was this done? Was when we would sit with these men, they had all served. Most of our table was all veterans. I don't remember one of them that was not a veteran that we sat with. Maybe Stan Brocious, and there was maybe another one or two, Jack. But there was another Jack, not my business partner. My business partner, he was still a kid then, back at where he lived in Montana. Regime change was made of puppets, the CIA puppets. Laos had a problem, South Korea had a problem, Cambodia had a problem, and I believe there was provincial Cambodia. I think provincial referred to the French Quarter, but if the CIA did not like who was running for office, it was exactly what happened with Charlie Kirk. You see, there was a shooter here that you see, and a lot of times those guys were country patriots. They weren't Marines. They were set up by our government, by our CIA stooges, because a lot of times they got killed, and they knew that they were sacrificing themselves for their country. Well, no, they were sacrificing themselves for the puppet regimes that were set up. So what happened is, you see this shooter. Then there would be another shooter, who's usually the real shooter. And then, a lot of times, when the shooter is seen, there's panic, and the security forces go right after that guy. They don't see the primary shooter, and they don't see the backup shooter, okay? Because a lot of times, the guy, either this guy that you see would fire a shot, or sometimes the primary shooter would do the distraction, and then the secondary shooter came in. Because a lot of times they would walk, whoever it was, say it was Charlie Kirk, they would walk him right into the kill shot. Because They already knew that maybe this guy didn't completely fool the security forces, and a lot of them stayed put with the target. So now your secondary guy has the option of making the other distraction behind them. So the only way to go usually is towards that backup shooter. Now, let's talk about weapons. As far as what I know, I was an armory officer. I worked on gun repairs, gunsmithing. Later on in life, I was a gunsmith, and then I knew some guys that were a lot better than me. Look, a Mauser 98K is a junk gun. You used to be able to go into gun shops and pick them up for $100, $150. I don't remember them being much cheaper. Other people said they bought them for $50, $75. They were mainly shot, but I don't give a shit if the thing was retooled. I don't care if it was rechambered. They're a junk gun. The stocks are uncomfortable. And how much practice does a 20-year-old kid really have with a 50-year-old gun that belonged to his grandfather, allegedly? I mean, the whole story is just fucking preposterous. I mean, unless this kid, like I was in competition at 10 years old, BB guns. I love BB guns. I have 2 of them out in the shop. I love BB guns to this day. They're not necessarily, I mean, these are steroided stuff, but how much practice does a 20-year-old kid have with a weapon like that? And in this day and age, how much ammo can you afford? My son's crying. My son's trying to shoot competition like I did, and he's going broke doing it. And nowadays, it's more prestige. Years ago, if I won a high-power championship, as I said, I was married then. I couldn't go out of state like I used to. But, I mean, I used to bring home some serious money. They used to run things like a Calcutta. And when I talk about that, Stan Brocious. Stan stood about 7'1". And in my younger day, he could comfortably put his elbow on my shoulder because he came over to one time and he goes, "Hey, kid, you got a lot of money riding on you." They used to run things called a Calcutta. And what it would be is a pot of money, and you agreed to a percentage that you wanted out of that pot. You couldn't take more than 50% of the pot. I usually took 40 because shooting cost money back in those days. But we often at the table discussed about Vietnam because they changed regimes in Cambodia, Laos, South Korea. We reshaped Asia. And what happened was the Chinese realized that was going on, is really how we got booted out of North Korea. And Vietnam, if you want to say existentially, is still a communist country. It's not like any other country, though. And you still don't have the freedoms, like you would have here. And this is what they're up to in this country, is changing up that game. Is we're going to be more like it's going to be the illusion of freedom, and what you could say, just like videos like this. In other words, say you say, just say you say, "I love my girlfriend," and you make a video. Your corrupt government can come and say you threatened to kill your girlfriend. Some of these guys that made these gun videos, you don't see as many of them these days because, like I said, the existential threat is an overbearing government that can make a bad person that has something intelligent to say, they can make them a criminal just because they don't like what that intelligent suggestive nature in speech. Okay? Countries have been altered by these thug regimes, and this is what is going on in this country. Charlie Kirk said not a racist word. He was more of a common sense, like you're not learning what you're supposed to learning. And I learned that when I came home from Iraq. My kid couldn't read a tape measure, couldn't balance a checkbook, couldn't do his finances. My mother was paying my son's bills. He had a place to live, and he basically had bills to pay, but he didn't even know how to do a checkbook. He didn't know what interest was in his savings. He didn't know how to save. Now he's doing that, and my other son. Now my daughters, they if you had an education even 35, 40 years ago, okay, when my kids were in school was, I don't know, what, 30 years ago. I think my oldest daughter is about 40, 46 now, 47. I mean, I was like 17 years old when she was born. So go do the math on that one. But I mean, she got out of school and she was a functional adult, even though she was what do you want to call it, promiscuous in her teens and got herself pregnant. She started out on the same foot Dad did, and I clamped down on that shit, and it got me in trouble too. But she ended up to be a functional adult. Now, my other daughter, she had an addict for a mother, and she had a military father who was no asset, and he was always gone. And basically, I provided her with my last home that I had left in Texas. I put her up in there, and she worked hard to turn that place into something. And the guy that she did marry, he was an Air Force officer. Thank God she married somebody with a brain. I taught him how to put a roof on, and his knees were, he first time up on that ladder, coming up on the, it was an old metal roof, and with the first storm, it just peeled it up, well, like rolled the roof up, and he was up there, and he's, well, the 2 weeks it took us, I stayed down there, that's how long, it's for two guys to hoist them long sheets up, and we did, we got 16-foot long sheets. I had to teach him how to sit on the slats and pull the stuff up. So, that's an ignore. These turds. Garbage healthcare. I gotta turn that off. Okay. Panic time. See, I wasn't prepared for that attack. I don't even talk to him. I have shit healthcare. So I taught people, and in those conversations on doing the roof, we were talking about snipers, and I got talking about Vietnam, and the kid was a little iffy on the old man telling him stories. But then when he met my dad, and my dad told him the same stories, and then he was like, well, they really did stuff like that? And I said, yeah, that was the CIA. And just recently, my son-in-law, when he called me, he says, hey, Pop, he says, now I got to believe that. He says that you weren't just blowing smoke. And I said to him, I said, Brad, I said, the worst thing a father or a father-in-law can do to you is tell you bullshit stories. I said, yeah, I've been a lot of places I can't prove I've been there. I said, I didn't get to take fucking souvenirs home. I went there to do my job, just like I got stranded over there in the desert, But we did just about the same thing with the aircraft, okay? You'd send one aircraft up, and the radar picked up on that, and he'd get his ass chased. And a lot of times, those weren't my squadron. They weren't ground-killing aircraft. We were down on the deck. But all the distractions went to what they saw. And that's how we got into some of the areas that we did to destroy the targets that we did, okay? So don't believe the bullshit stories. Okay? And I believe that's exactly how Charlie Kirk was done. And then, oh, what about the bullet? Well, we never really did get any ballistics. And believe it or not, they have specialized bullets that'll melt in your skin. They used to use ice back in the 50s and 60s. They had bullets made of ice. Carried them in a special little cryo case that was battery powered. Didn't work out so well, mainly. Sometimes they got there and there wasn't no bullet to fire. But then they eventually made chemical agents, chemical bullets and stuff like that. That stuff exists. So I'll upload this, and I'm sorry I hurt somebody's feelings. But yeah, I can't talk about the Navy ships, but we have a national emergency about to emerge, folks. Thanks for watching my videos.